Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 13th. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. We have a lot to get to. There's lots of MLB news as we preview some more of the season, get into a major signing, as well as some news from around the NFL with some veteran quarterbacks potentially being on the move. Where will they go? Where will they end up? We'll talk about all of that and more coming up in just a second. But before we do all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 13th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our first topic of the day, that having to do with Aaron Rodgers and the quarterback situation from around the league. The Jets and Aaron Rodgers have officially decided to part ways with each other heading into this season. This was one that was up in the air. For a long time, I thought the Jets were going to bring him back, let him play through his age 42 season, but a couple things have gotten in the way of that. They flew him in and had a meeting where they were still undecided and said, hey, if you are going to join our team, these are a couple things that you need us to do. And it seems like one of those big turning points, the reason that the Jets decided not to keep him, is because they asked him not to do his weekly appearances on the Pat McAfee show, and he said no. He said he was going to continue to do his weekly appearances on the Pat McAfee show. And this was asked for a couple of reasons, right? Because on surface level, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal that a player is going to do a media appearance. There's plenty of players around the league that do weekly media appearances on local shows, on national shows, and stuff like that. But the issue is, this is one that's been bringing up a lot of drama. Aaron Rodgers is a guy that doesn't tend to be tight-lipped when it comes to a lot of things. He's someone that's just going to speak his mind, especially when things aren't going well. And it causes a lot of issues behind the scenes. There were also asks for him to show up into all the off-season workouts, which that one I understand. Whichever was the final blow, and whatever decision they came to, it ended up coming out as we are going to be moving on from Aaron Rodgers. And this carries with it a $49 million dead cap hit that the Jets now have to deal with. That can be split up over a couple of years, or it can be done over one, depending on if it's a post or pre-June 1 cut. But now Aaron Rodgers is a free agent. And right now, the Jets quarterback room, they're going to need to find one. Because right now, they have Tyrod Taylor on a one-year deal, as well as a couple of young players in Jordan Travis and an XFL/UFL former starting quarterback in Adrian Martinez on the roster. Those are the three quarterbacks that they have rostered, and having Tyrod there isn't necessarily the worst thing. He's a guy that has led teams to the playoffs before when they have a good defense, and I think with this Jets team, if you have to stick with Tyrod for one season, that's not the worst thing in the world. But obviously, that's not going to be very inspiring for Jets fans. So the Jets need to go out and find what probably would be a bridge quarterback. At this point, I'm thinking a guy along the lines of Russell Wilson might come in. He's going to be another one of those veteran quarterbacks, someone that could come in and change the culture, or at least go with the culture that they're trying to set up, not going to be an outlier, someone that sticks out like a thumb, like Aaron Rodgers was with this Jets team. Now, where Aaron Rodgers goes is a whole nother question, right? We've been talking about this for a while, and there's a lot of different places that he could. The Steelers seem like the number one option, and there's a lot of reports saying that the Steelers would be a good spot for him, but there hasn't been a lot of reports talking about how interested the Steelers actually are in a guy like Aaron Rodgers. Reports coming out from the Steelers earlier on in this offseason were talking about the Steelers wanting to find a long-term answer at the quarterback position. They didn't want to just keep going with these bridge quarterbacks. They were going to sign Justin Fields or Russell Wilson to one of those long-term deals that they were talking about. In this point, it seems like they're leaning towards Justin Fields. It seems like Russell Wilson is going to be the one that's out of there. But now that Aaron Rodgers is out, there's a relationship there with him and Mike Tomlin, but it doesn't seem to fit what Art Rooney and the owner was saying about their plan for this upcoming offseason. Now, you don't You don't always just get a first ballot Hall of Famer able to walk in to your room, to your team. And if the Steelers were able to get a quarterback with like Aaron Rodgers, if he's at his best, probably going to be able to bring in a guy like Devontae Adams with him. If they're able to bring the cap space, that fixes a lot of their problems right there. It would be the best fit for him. Hands down, that would be the best fit for Aaron Rodgers. It just might not be the best fit for the Steelers. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. I think there's a couple of other spots that would be better for that might be more interested in him than the Steelers are, and I don't know if the Steelers are really going to be willing to take a risk on a 42-year-old quarterback, someone that comes with his own issues, especially in a locker room that has dealt with a lot of big personalities currently and in the past, especially when they said they wanted to choose one of their two guys. Seems like they're going to bring back Justin Fields. I don't know if you really want Justin Fields to sit for another year while you have Russell Wilson, while you have Aaron Rodgers there. So other options there for him include, of course, the oft talked about Minnesota Vikings route. Continue his Brett Favre arc of leaving the Packers, going to the Jets, and then going to the Vikings. And this one is only on here because, it's a little funny, right? This one is probably not going to happen. The Vikings have their future, or what they think is their future, in J.J. McCarthy. If it turns out that he is not the answer, they can go out and they can get Aaron Rodgers. But Aaron Rodgers probably is looking for a place that he will be the guaranteed starter. Again, I think if he can go to Minnesota, that's going to be an excellent team. We saw what Sam Darnold was able to do with that squad. I can only imagine what Aaron Rodgers could do with that squad if they were able to go land him and they decided to push back J.J. McCarthy's season debut for another year. Do I think that's going to happen? No. I think they're all in on J.J. McCarthy. They took him with the top 15 pick in the NFL draft at number 11, and I think they're going to commit to him and have him be the guy. Aaron Rodgers would be a good fit over there, though. Outside of that, there aren't really a lot of great fits. We can talk about the Los Angeles Rams. They're having their own drama with a future Hall of Fame quarterback in Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford being rumored to go to a lot of places, including the New York Giants. If he moves out of there, Aaron Rodgers would be a really good fit for them. For a year, a rental quarterback that can go into a playoff team, that would be the best spot for him. Now, that does depend on what this Rams and Matthew Stafford end up doing. If Matthew Stafford comes back, that one is out of there. So that's more of an iffy, but I do think if Matthew Stafford is gone, the best spot is the Rams. He already has a house over there in LA. Pretty comfy. He's from California. He gets to return over there, and I think that would be a really good spot for him as well. A couple other ones that he might go to just because they need quarterbacks: the Giants, the Raiders, the Browns, the Titans, right? There are two quarterbacks that are probably going to go in the top 10. There are 4 teams that are picking in the top 10. 2 of them are going to be left out. One of those teams, whether it be the Titans, the Browns, the Raiders, or the Giants, could go out and get Aaron Rodgers. None of those teams, I think, would be a great fit for Aaron Rodgers. None of those teams, I think, should be particularly interested in Aaron Rodgers because he's going to be too good for them to get their quarterback of the future, but he's not going to be bad enough. But he's not going to be the kind of guy that you want as a bridge quarterback either. Those ones, I think, are the most likely ones to sign him and have him be a starter. But I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for the team or for Aaron Rodgers to go to those places at age 42, especially after experiencing a bad offensive line with the Jets this last season. There's a couple more that I think are interesting, though. And these are places where he could be a backup. And the reason why I put these at the end is because we all know Aaron Rodgers isn't going to go be a backup. He's definitely a top 32 quarterback in the NFL. I would go as far to say that he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, which is still a pretty steep fall off for him. We were having him in top 10 conversations at the beginning of last season. Now, top 20, I think, is the perfect spot for him. Maybe top 25 if you really have an anti-Aaron Rodgers agenda there. But there's a couple spots that I think would be really good for him to go, either as a veteran leader that could teach a quarterback or as a true backup. And as a true backup, that would be the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins desperately need to find a guy that they can have behind Tua Tagovailoa. Tua does not have the injury history that you want as you're trying to build a successful team. That is one that I think would work out really well, although I do not see it happening at all because Aaron Rodgers is not going to go somewhere to be a backup. The other one is the Indianapolis Colts. And we talked about that connection with the Pat McAfee show. That's in Indianapolis. He can just go do his weekly segments over there. And I would say that this would be a bigger, more likely reason or more likely team if the fact that the Colts and Pat McAfee didn't get into a fight earlier this season. They got into a bit of a fight. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal, but I don't know if the Colts would be all in on letting Aaron Rodgers come in to either be a backup or a season start or to be a backup to Anthony Richardson, which is the only way that they would bring him in, right? He needs to understand Anthony Richardson is the presumed future of that team. Even if he hasn't really looked his best, it's going to be his team to start. If you bring Aaron Rodgers in for a year and sit him, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. He needs reps on the field, and I don't think that works out, especially as he enters his third year in the NFL, having started some games already. It'll feel more like a benching like it did with Joe Flacco rather than anything that comes with just being a mentor. Still, there's a little bit of connection with Pat McAfee and the Colts, and having Aaron Rodgers as that veteran quarterback to help Anthony Richardson grow, I think could be pretty good. They play very different play styles, but I think if Aaron Rodgers is able to help him a little bit like he did with Jordan Love, that could be really good for the Colts. Overall, I think his landing spot is probably going to be with one of those four teams that I mentioned picking in the top 10, either the Giants, the Raiders, the Browns, or the Titans. And if I had to pick one, it's going to be the Browns or the Titans, just because those two teams seem like the ones that if a quarterback is there would be less likely to take it. The Titans might trade out of number 1. That leaves a spot open for Aaron Rodgers. The Browns need to focus on edge rusher after they're going to most likely trade away Myles Garrett. I see them taking Abdul Carter at 2. The Giants have seemingly fallen in love with Shedeur Sanders, and they'll take him at 3, or Cam Ward if he somehow falls to him. And the Raiders also have fallen in love with Shedeur Sanders. They'll take him at 6 if they fall to him there. Overall, just not too much going on, and I think Aaron Rodgers ends up in one of those top 10 teams to finish off his career. The other potential is him retiring, which there is real potential in that. He's a 41-year-old guy. There aren't a lot of great options for him to go to. I don't know if he wants to end like this. I feel like he wants to still be playing football, but I also felt like the Jets would bring him back. So we're not sure. He's a guy that's probably going to go into the dark room and reflect a little bit on his decisions, on what he's going to do as he gets further away from his prime in the NFL. But I think he's coming back for at least one more season, one more year to try and, finish up, end on a positive note. But let me know what your thoughts are. Where do you think Aaron Rodgers ends up? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the NFL offseason is officially here, and that means we're going to do our dream offseason for each NFL team. We did the Eagles the other day. We're going to continue through the NFC East, this time stopping over in Dallas and taking a look at the Cowboys. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the future of Aaron Rodgers after him and the Jets have agreed to part ways, leaving a $49 million dead cap situation for the Jets to figure out as they part ways with the future first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFL offseason a little bit more. We continue our tour around the NFL and specifically the NFC East, as we take a look at the dream offseason and a little bit of a season review for the Dallas Cowboys. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 14th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Dallas Cowboys here and what a good offseason for them might look like. The Cowboys are in a little bit of trouble when it comes to this offseason. They were supposed to have a big offseason last year. Obviously, that kind of blew up in their face. They ended up paying a lot of players, a couple players, big money. Dak Prescott, now the highest paid quarterback in the NFL and makes $60 million a year. CeeDee Lamb, one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL, making $35 million a year. That's most of the cap space right there. The Cowboys come into this offseason after going 7-10 on the year, a very disappointing season. But that's not necessarily their roster's fault. There were some glaring roster holes that they can fix and need to fix heading into next season. But overall, one of the biggest issues this season was the injuries. We saw it really come up and bite them, especially on the defensive end. We saw star players from the defense all over the place go down. Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs, your corner duo, were both missing for a large portion of the season, either at the same time or one missing, and then one would come back and the other one would get hurt. Right? You also have star pass rushers and linebackers Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, both missing time with injury this season. And of course, on the offensive end, Zach Martin, one of your star guards, goes down with injury. Dak Prescott goes down with injury as well, and you're forced to go with Cooper Rush for the back half of the season. There was a lot that did not go well for the Dallas Cowboys, and I think if they're able to stay healthy, this season will immediately show an uptick of at least 2 wins from where they were last season. That's not to say this is a perfect team. That's not to say this is a team that if they sit on their hands and do nothing, will make a deep playoff run, will make a Super Bowl run, because that's the goal with the Cowboys right now. They're going to be playing in a very tough division next season with the Eagles, who just won a Super Bowl, and the Commanders, who have a rising, up-and-coming, arguably top 5 quarterback in the NFL in Jaden Daniels. So when we look at what's going to happen this offseason, it starts with the cap space. And right now, they're the 26th ranked team in cap space with negative $5 million heading into the offseason. They're going to need to restructure some contracts. They also are going to get hit hard by free agency. They have 27 free agents, 22 of them are unrestricted free agents. A couple of those are key guys you need to bring back. DeMarcus Lawrence, one of your best pass rushers, is an unrestricted free agent. He's someone that you can franchise tag, but you need to bring him back as soon as possible. The franchise tag deadline actually just about a week away at this point. We'll find out soon where the franchise tags land. He's a candidate for that as the Cowboys head into the offseason. Eric Kendricks led the team in tackles last season, and that's not necessarily a great thing. Eric Kendricks is an aging linebacker, but he is familiar with the defensive scheme of Mike Zimmer, and having him back on the team would be huge. He's a key free agent. Zach Martin, we brought up, is a little bit older, has lost a bit of a step, but you're not going to be able to get a lot of guards at his caliber. He's someone that would be really good for them to be able to bring in. And then the last one's a little bit of an iffy. You have all your backup quarterbacks, Trey Lance and Cooper Rush, both unrestricted free agents. Probably want to bring one of them back at least, especially in this week of a free agency quarterback market, and how important it is to have a good, solid backup, as the Cowboys themselves saw the consequences of this season. You also have all of your running backs being free agents, and a lot of the rumors around that number 12 overall pick that they have are saying that they're going to go out and they're going to draft a guy like Ashton Genty out of Boise State at number 12. That's what my mock has as well. But you want another running back behind him. A rookie running back is fine. Both Zeke and Rico Dowdle, both going to be unrestricted free agents. You can probably get both of them or one of them back on a really cheap deal next season. The veteran min, that's something you might want to look at as well. The other thing that's very important to take a look at for this Dallas Cowboys team is the fact that they still need to figure out what they're doing with Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons has 1 year left on his deal, but you generally don't want to see a top 3 defensive player in the NFL go to free agency, because that's going to make them a whole lot more expensive. Also, if you get extensions done early, the contract is going to look more and more like a discount as the time goes on, because other guys will outshine them and other guys will overtake them when it comes to the contract market, right? When it comes to that line market, Micah Parsons is going to set the record for probably the biggest defensive contract in the history of the NFL, because he's a very special player like that. Micah Parsons, when he was off the field, this defense was awful. One of the worst in the NFL, especially against the run. When he was healthy and on the field, this defense transformed into a respectable unit down the stretch, and that's why they started winning games. The Cowboys need to lock him up, and that should be priority number 1. I understand you're going to be losing a key piece in a guy like a DeMarcus Lawrence, which should be priority number 2 when it comes to the Cowboys. But if you don't get Micah Parsons back, as good as DeMarcus Lawrence is, you have set your team back about 2 to 3 wins every single year, as well as going up against a guy that you don't want to go up against in Micah Parsons ever. This was a very messy coaching cycle for the Cowboys as well. They were trying to renegotiate a contract with Mike McCarthy, whose deal eventually ran out. There were reports that they had agreed to terms. They were trying to figure out length, and then eventually it just ran out of steam. They ran out of time to extend him. He became a coaching free agent, and now he's out. They ended up bringing in Brian Schottenheimer, who was the offensive coordinator of this team last season, to be the next head coach. It was an uninspiring hire. It's not necessarily a bad hire, but it is uninspiring. There were plenty of guys still out there, despite them being late to the coaching cycle, that they could have gotten. Aside from Ben Johnson, who actually still hadn't been hired yet, aside from Mike Vrabel, the only one that had been hired, they could have gotten any one of those coaching candidates. Now, this Cowboys team, like I said, is going to be stuck with their roster as is right now, because they don't have a lot of cap situation. They don't have a lot of cap flexibility. They're going to have to go and restructure a lot of these guys to go and get the money to bring in some key free agents. If they can re-sign DeMarcus Lawrence and extend Micah Parsons, then your next moves should be going out and shoring up that defense a little bit, getting some depth at the cornerback position in case Deron Bland or Trayvon Diggs go down again, because Trayvon Diggs has been a little bit iffy with his injury history, and Deron Bland also a little bit of issues with injuries. Overshown is going to be out for most of the season. He was having a really good season at linebacker. If you can go out and you can get an athletic linebacker in the draft, that would be huge for them to cover that hole. And the other thing is, you should go out and get a cheap wide receiver. It doesn't have to be a T. Higgins level receiver. You can go and re-sign Brandon Cooks, who's also a free agent here if he's cheap enough. That's a guy that could be good next to CeeDee Lamb. But you want to make sure that there are other options on this team, because the issue that the Cowboys had this season, especially offensively, is the fact that teams could just double, triple cover CeeDee Lamb, and outside of that, they didn't really have another great option to throw the ball to. That's something that I would like them to establish, and that's something I would like them to focus on. Getting a running game would be a huge help for that. Then they wouldn't be able to just do light boxes all the time, and getting a guy like Ashton Genty would really help against that. But also getting another threat at wide receiver would be huge. That's what the best offseason looks like for the Cowboys. At the end of the day, they're not going to be able to make too many moves because they just don't have the cap flexibility to do it. It's going to be a very similar team to what it was this year. They just have to hope for health. And I think if they are healthy, I think if this year's team was 100% healthy for the entire way, they flip their record to about 10-7 rather than 7-10. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the MLB. Baseball is about to start. Pitchers and catchers have reported all over baseball, and the final major piece of free agency has finally found his way to a new team. Alex Bregman signs with the Boston Red Sox. We'll talk about what that means for him, what offers he was looking at getting from other teams, as well as what it means for the Red Sox moving forward. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over what a dream offseason might look like for the Dallas Cowboys as we continue our preview of the NFL offseason. In this segment, we turn our attention to baseball. Not only is the NFL season over now as we head into draft season and off-season talk, but the baseball season has officially heated up. Pitchers and catchers are reporting everywhere, and Alex Bregman, the last major domino in the free agency cycle this year to fall, has found its new team, the Boston Red Sox. We'll talk about what that means for him, for the Red Sox, and everything else. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 13th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of baseball talk here as we reach this point where pitchers and catchers have reported, as Alex Bregman, the former third baseman for the Houston Astros, has found a new home, agrees to terms with the Boston Red Sox on a 3-year, $120 million deal with some deferred money. That's been the big thing in sports recently, right? Deferred money, especially in baseball, but he gets a little bit of that deferred money further down the contract to make it a little easier to swallow for the Red Sox right now. But 3 years, $120 at $40 million AAV was the biggest contract that he was offered. It wasn't the biggest by term, it wasn't the biggest by total, but when we take a look at the other offers he was getting from teams like the Astros to re-sign 6 years, $156 million, the Tigers 6 years, $171 million, and the Cubs at 4 years, $120 million. This was the one that offered him the most amount of cash. The Red Sox, I also think, are just going to be one of the better teams with his addition to the squad. The Boston Red Sox already have a pretty established third baseman in Rafael Devers, which some thought might turn him away from this destination if he really was dead set on playing third base. But the Red Sox reports are from the Bregman camp as well, that he is okay with and is planning on playing second base this year. If he can swing over to second base, which I think all signs indicate that he can, keep Rafael Devers over there at third, that makes this a lot easier, and it really shores up an infield that already looks pretty good. This is going to be a really interesting season for the Boston Red Sox now that they add Alex Bregman. Not only do they have that really good up the middle defense, but that lineup looks really scary. They have one of the best pitching staffs in the AL after trading for Garrett Crochet from the Chicago White Sox earlier this offseason. Now that lineup is pretty scary, especially 1 to 5. You got Duran playing left field, Rafael Devers playing third base, Bregman at second, Cassis at first, and Story at shortstop. That is a really, really good top half of the lineup. The bottom half isn't that awful either, with Yoshida, Wong, Abreu, and Rafaela finishing out that lineup. It's a pretty solid group that they have. And especially with that pitching staff, being able to add some bats this offseason was exactly what they needed to do. The Red Sox are a team that are poised to make a huge, huge jump, and I love this signing for them. Alex Bregman is a guy that I think really feasted on the park that the Astros had, a shorter left field wall. It's going to be the same thing over there in Boston. Now, he does have to deal with the Green Monster, but he should still be able to have a pretty good offensive season. If he can get back to some Gold Glove level defense, this team is going to go a long way, and I really just love this signing for him, right? If his other options, returning to the Astros, that could have been good, but the Astros are kind of on a downward trajectory. The Cubs, I don't think makes a lot of sense for them to sign him right now. They do need a third baseman, but they have a lot of other issues they need to fill. The Tigers would have been a really interesting one, though. I would have loved to see him with the Tigers. His former manager and AJ Hinch over there as well. I think that could have been a really good pairing, but he chooses the Boston Red Sox. The most amount of money, and it's a short term, so he could go re-up later on if this contract works out. I think this is a great signing for him. As we get further into baseball season, as we get further on into the offseason, and when everyone else starts to report in about a week or two, we're really going to start to see how everything goes together. But right now, free agency is all but done. Still a couple pieces hanging around, but Alex Bregman was the last major piece of the puzzle that needed to find its home. He finds his home in Boston, and I really do love that signing. Up next, we're going to continue our talk on baseball, but we're going to do some previews. We did our first preview yesterday going over the World Series champion, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now we continue our tour around the NL West as we preview what the season could be and what the offseason was for the San Diego Padres. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 13th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over Alex Bregman finding his new home in Boston, signing with the Red Sox on a 3-year, $120 million deal. In this segment, we continue our tour around baseball as opening day is just about a month away. We're going to go over every single team, this time starting with the Padres. We went over the Dodgers yesterday. We'll continue the NL West. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 13th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into our next MLB season preview, this one being the San Diego Padres. The Padres come off of a season that was a huge improvement from them. 2 seasons ago, they did not make the playoffs after what was an extremely disappointing year. This season, they finished 93-69 and lost in the NLDS to the New York They lost in the NLDS to the New York Mets, right? This is a team that won a playoff series this year. This is a team that still has a lot of the same roster heading into it. But one of the main themes of this offseason, for the San Diego Padres was the fact that they were kind of playing second fiddle to the Dodgers again. And that's kind of been their whole existence. That little brother to the Dodgers. They were second in a lot of these major free agent signings. They lost a couple of their guys to the Dodgers, guys that they were really looking to get back. But this is still a solid team. We'll start off with the guys that they lost in free agency. Tanner Scott, they were unable to grab in free agency, and that one stings because they gave up a whole haul to get him at the deadline last season. He goes crosstown and joins the Dodgers in a stacked bullpen already. If they were to bring him back, that would have made this bullpen from great to elite if they were able to keep him in that closing role. Jurickson Profar had a breakout season last year, made an all-star game, now goes down to Atlanta to join the Braves, forming one of the better outfields in all of the MLB. They also lost Kyle Higashioka, who was a pretty solid backup catcher for them last season. Not going to be, a huge loss, but still a solid contributor to this team. They lose Ha-Seong Kim as well, who goes over to the Rays. He's dealing with a little bit of injuries. They decided to part ways after he did not pick up his player option. That one stings a little bit as they're a little bit weak at the DH spot. They would like to get another bat, and having a guy like Ha-Seong Kim would be pretty good for that. They also lost one of their starting pitchers, although that one doesn't hurt that much. They lost Martin Perez, who started 26 games for them last season, as well as losing Donovan Solano and a couple of other guys that weren't really huge contributors to their cause last season. On the additions side, they were able most recently to bring in Nick Pivetta, starting pitcher, on a 4-year contract, $17 million a year, to add to one of the better starting rotations in all of baseball. We went over a great starting rotation that the Dodgers had yesterday in last episode. The Padres arguably have one that can go toe-to-toe with them. A lot of the teams in the NL West have great pitching staffs. It's just not quite to that level. They also were able to steal Jason Hayward from the Dodgers as the Dodgers replaced him with Michael Conforto. He's an older baseball player. It's a 1-year contract. They went out and they got Connor Joe, who projected lineups has him as a DH, probably not the one that they want, as well as taking a minor league gamble on Gavin Sheets, another guy who has had some success in the MLB, but not the most successful guy, maybe a bat that they can bring up and play in that DH role. Really, what we're looking at here is a team that is trying to best the Dodgers, and that's going to be the goal for everybody here. Obviously, the Dodgers won the World Series last year, but it means a little bit more for a team like the San Diego Padres. When we look at what their lineup looks like right now, it's led off by Luis Arias, who they were able to stave off arbitration for, agreeing to terms with the first baseman, who's one of the best pure contact hitters in the entire sport. He's going to have one of the best averages in the league year in and year out, and he's not going to strike out. Behind him, you have Fernando Tatis Jr., who has MVP-style potential over in right field. You also have Manny Machado, another guy who, not quite in his prime, but is one of these great hitters and an excellent defender at third base. The way that he's able to make these throws across the diamond look effortless. His arm strength is incredible. It's super fun to watch. Jackson Merrill in center field, hitting fourth after a breakout rookie season where he almost won Rookie of the Year, finishing just behind the Pirates' Paul Skeens. Still a really good season for Jackson Merrill. He's going to look to build on that. Xander Bogaerts, an excellent hitter at shortstop. He's going to go in. Then you have Jake Cronenworth, who I really like. Jake Cronenworth. He's not going to be a star. He's not going to be a superstar kind of guy, but getting some really solid at-bats and defense at your second base position all the way down in the 6 hole is pretty important. Connor Joe is what they have projected at the DH. I've seen a couple other places project other players to be at DH. If they can get a real big bat, someone like a boom or bust kind of guy. I don't know if there's a Nelson Cruz-ish kind of build out in the free agency pool still. That's someone that might be interesting to go out and get as an everyday DH, whether it's in the organization or out of the organization. Jason Hayward to play left field. Like to get a little bit of depth over there in the outfield, and then Elias Diaz to play catcher as well. A pretty solid pick for him. The rotation, though, the starting rotation, I think is going to be the gem of this team. We just went over what was a pretty stacked lineup, but really this is a rotation that, especially if everyone's healthy, can go 5 deep pretty easy. You have Dylan Cease, who they were able to acquire in a trade last season, although there have been some rumors surrounding him being moved again. I don't know about that. I don't know if it'd be the right move for the Padres. Dylan Cease is amazing. You have Michael King, who was amazing in the postseason as well. They were able to get him in the Juan Soto trade when they traded Juan Soto over to the Yankees, and he stepped up huge for them. Yu Darvish, a former ace. They just signed Nick Pivetta. We went over that. They also have Randy Vasquez and Matt Waldron, who can come in and be that 5th starter, that kind of short starter guy. If they're able to get Joe Musgrove back, Joe Musgrove can be an excellent 5th starter, and that's where he might slide in there. Maybe the 4th starter ahead of Nick Pivetta, but Joe Musgrove is dealing with Tommy John. He's going to miss a good portion of the season. But even so, that's a pretty deadly 1 to 4, and then you can figure out that 5 spot pretty easy. The bullpen could have been amazing. We talked about what happened. They ended up losing out on Tanner Scott, who I think they really would have loved to have back after how much they gave up to get him. A huge haul for that. They still have 2 guys that can be solid closers in the MLB. They have Jason Adam, who's probably going to live as the setup man to Robert Suarez. Robert Suarez was the closer last year for them, aside from Tanner Scott. That's a pretty solid 1-2 duo. Is this team going to live up to what the expectations are of a Dodgers team? Absolutely not. No one in the MLB is going to do that. Vegas has their over-under set at 85.5 wins. That's basically 30 wins less. 25 wins less than the Dodgers were when we looked at these odds the other day. I don't know, and I think that's pretty accurate. I think this team did lose a bit of a step, especially in the outfield, letting a couple good bats go, like a Jurickson Profar. Replacing him with a Jason Hayward isn't quite going to do it for me. They need to get another bat over there. This wasn't a great offseason for them. And it wasn't necessarily a bad one either. It was just one where I think they took a step in the wrong direction because they were pursuing a lot of these guys that the Dodgers ended up getting. They were pursuing pretty heavily and were in the final 2 for Roki Sasaki. If they were able to land Roki Sasaki, this offseason looks completely different than the way it does right now. But overall, this is a Padres team that's going to be fighting for a wild card spot, not really a division. I don't think anybody is going to be fighting for a division in the NL West, especially with the Dodgers, but you never know because it is a very good Padres team. This is a team that won 93 games last year. I think they're probably going to win about 86, 87 games this year. So might take a slight over on the win total for this one for the Padres. But also, this is an older team. This is a team that could get devastated with injuries. A lot of their arms are older. A lot of their bats are older. And it's not a team that has too much depth behind them. So if anything kind of goes through the locker room there, if they get a couple freak injuries, this season is going to look like a disaster, which is not what you want. I think this is a good Padres squad. I think they'll find a way to potentially fight for a playoff spot. They're going to be fighting for one of those wild card spots, and it's going to be super competitive in the NL this season. But I think they might be able to find a way in. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. How do you think the Padres do? What grade would you give their offseason? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to hockey. The Four Nations face-off started yesterday, and it was an incredible game. We saw Canada take it in an overtime thriller, 4-3 over Sweden. We'll break down that game, as well as the U.S. versus Finland. That puck drop is tonight. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 13th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the MLB season preview for the San Diego Padres. In this segment, we turn our attention to the world on the ice. Ice hockey. It is currently the All-Star break for what it's worth, but it is the Four Nations face-off right now, and we saw an excellent first matchup between Canada and Sweden that went to overtime. We saw new overtime rules take place, as well as a dream come true for all the hockey aficionados out there in this game, and we'll talk about all of that in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 13th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our fifth and final segment here on today's show, that having to do with the Four Nations face-off as the first game came down to the wire. It looked like Canada was going to absolutely dominate this one, jumping out to a 2-0 lead after the first period, holding Sweden to just just 3 shots on goal in the first period. But credit to Sweden. They were able to make the adjustments. They were able to storm all the way back, netting 2 goals of their own in that third period to tie it up and send it to overtime. But really, one of the big things about this game was that we got to see one of the best power play units in the history of hockey, maybe, team up. We saw McDavid, we saw Crosby, we saw McKinnon, we saw Makar, all on the ice at the same time. And 1 minute into the game, 15 seconds into that first power play, we saw something that everybody, myself included, was hoping and praying would happen with this Canada team. We saw a McDavid to Crosby to McKinnon goal. We saw a beautiful, beautiful feed from Crosby to McKinnon through the legs, through the slot to a wide open point where McKinnon was able to net the puck for the first goal of the Four Nations Classic way early on into the game to set the tone. Sidney Crosby had 3 assists in this game. He looked like the best player on the ice, which is crazy at 37 years old, playing with the future of hockey and Connor McDavid, and of course playing with McKinnon as well. This was an absolute masterclass from Crosby, and it's reminded us why Crosby is as good as he is. 3 points in his Four Nations, in the first game of the Four Nations. Everyone else only had 1 point in this one. That includes Marchand, who had a goal. Mitch Marner, who had the game winner in overtime. McKinnon, McDavid, all had a point. We had Stone with a point as well. All of these guys with 1 point, but Sidney Crosby above the rest of them with 3 assists in this one. He's won 26 straight games wearing a Team Canada jersey. They have not lost in nearly 30 matches, 30 games with Sidney Crosby on the ice, and that is crazy. That is an insane win streak, and I can't wait to see what happens when they go up against the U.S. This is going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, we saw a couple of new things as well. We saw a little bit of goaltending issues from both of these teams. Gustafsson having a really good year with the Wild this year, kind of going up against a super team like that's never going to be easy, and he did a pretty solid job after the first period of shutting them down. But on the other side, Jordan Binnington didn't really look his best. He let in a couple goals that probably should have stopped, and the goaltending for Canada, definitely the weakest link. They also lost Shea Theodore in this one. Shea Theodore, one of their defensemen, they're now down to just 6 defensemen. They aren't allowed to bring in another defenseman unless they lose another one, unless they go below 6, as the International Hockey Federation has decreed. They're allowed to go up to the next NHLer from Canada and say, hey, if this happens, you're next. Are you interested? But they're not allowed to replace Shea Theodore on the roster, as he is now done for the rest of the tournament, and that's going to leave them at quite a little bit of disadvantage on the defensive end, something that they really did need, especially with their goaltending situation. I still think this Canada team is at least the second best one in the tournament. The only question is this U.S. team going to be able to handle the firepower that this Canadian team has? We also saw some new rules being tested out that teams and players and the NHL are trying to implement. The 10-minute overtime being one of them. Right now in the NHL, it's 5-minute overtime periods of 3-on-3 hockey, and then you go to a shootout. The shootout is something that a lot of hockey fans are not a fan of. They want to do these longer overtime periods. They want it to be settled in a game situation, and we got to see a 10-minute overtime. We saw Nathan McKinnon say he was gassed after this one. This one went 6 minutes into overtime before we saw the game winner, and I think it was a big success. Obviously, that 3-on-3 hockey just makes it a lot of fun. It's tough to do. Nathan McKinnon is a guy that likes to be overly aggressive in that 3-on-3 situation, so it makes sense why he was gassed, especially after playing a long game of hockey, especially after playing top 6 minutes, top 6 forward minutes, and then going to overtime. But still, I really did like that 10-minute overtime period with the 3-on-3 hockey. I think that's something that might or should get implemented into the NHL relatively soon. Not sure if players are really going to love it, but this was an excellent way to kick off the Four Nations face-off, and I'm really excited to see what happens tonight when the debut of the U.S. team happens. They take on the Finland team. That probably looks like the weakest one. They lost a lot of guys due to injury this season that weren't able to show up to the Finland team, but still, this is a team full of NHL talent. The U.S. team should not feel cocky about this. It's going to be a fun game. The intensity level in this one, in these games, are for real. These teams are representing their countries. These are guys that really want to play hard and they want to win. This isn't like an all-star game. This is a game where everyone is trying their hardest to play winning hockey, and that is really cool to see. You basically get the best lineups. You get a mini Olympics where everyone is trying their hardest at all times, and I'm so excited to see what happens as we especially get to a US-Canada game on Saturday. But this should be a lot of fun. But let me know what your thoughts were for this Four Nations game. It was awesome. We got to see everything we wanted to out of that Canada team. It went to overtime. Excellent game played by Sweden, and now we get a game between the US and Finland tonight. I think the U.S. wins that one pretty easily, but anything can happen. But let me know what your thoughts are, and thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back tomorrow going over everything you need to know for the NBA All-Star break, as that is officially on us, and everything else going around the world of sports. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.